Chapter 12: Lying, Cheating, Breaking Promises, and Stealing. We begin this portion of our textbook by talking about the moral implications of lying. To do this, we need to define the term. According to our textbook, lying is an intentionally deceptive message in the form of a statement or piece of information deliberately presented as being true, anything meant to deceive or give a wrong impression. A couple of things important there. First, not all untrue statements are lies. Nowadays, sometimes that distinction is blurred. We listen to the political discourse in our country and someone makes a mistaken statement. They get their facts wrong. And immediately the other side will seize upon that and say that's a lie. Note that the definition we're using here includes the term intentional. There has to be the deliberate intent to deceive for an untrue statement to be a lie. It has to be deliberately presented as truth by someone who knows that it is not the truth. And our authors point out that a lie can be more than just verbal. Anything intended to give a wrong impression would be a lie. Now, there's one thing I would add to this definition because I think it needs to be added. A lie must also have a nefarious intent. Now, that term, nefarious, may be a new one to you. Let's just use it as a simple word. It has to have an evil intent. You are deliberately trying to gain an unfair advantage over another. It is only when that is the case that an untrue statement rises to the level of moral importance. And in my opinion, that is the only time an untrue statement becomes a lie. That's going to be important as we continue the discussion, so I want you to try to keep it in mind. For an untrue statement to be a lie, there has to be an evil intent in misleading, deceiving. And that evil intent is to gain an unfair advantage. This is why I think the author says that a white lie does not usually rise to the level that we consider it morally important. Why not? It's a false statement. The reason is there is no intent to injure. And so I think in the author's clarification here with white lies, he makes the point I'm trying to make, that there has to be that intent to injure, to gain for myself an advantage over another that I ought not to have. The authors point out that there are two types of lies. There are lies of commission. These are direct statements that are outright lies. And then there are lies of omission. What we mean by this is half-truths, told as though they were the whole truth. When that's done, that is a lie. To represent a half-truth as the whole truth is to deceive. And this is why in a court of law, the oath goes something like this. You promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that nothing but the truth would include embellishing. Now, some embellishing, we would say, well, that's harmless. A comedian may embellish a story to make it funny, and we understand that, that's going on. Someone may use hyperbole, and we understand what's going on there. But if you add an embellishment that is intent to deceive, so that injury can be done to another, so that you can gain an unfair advantage over another, then that's a lie. Second subject we're going to talk about in this chapter is cheating. Cheating is a form of lying. It's deceiving by trickery swindling, misleading, acting dishonestly, or practicing fraud. I think it's easier to remember cheating this way. Cheating is breaking the rules, either the rules that are formally stated. A football team, for example, may have a rule against, or a football league may have a rule against chop blocking. Chop blocking is where a defender, someone defending their quarterback or trying to create a running lane for a running back, engages the defensive player, stands him up, and then another player takes out that player's knees. That's against the rules. It's cheating. And we use cheating to talk about being unfaithful in relationships. You have a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you find out they're cheating on you. Well, most relationships don't begin with a formal set of rules, but there's an implied set of rules that we all understand when it comes to relationship. And if someone is going with you and they're messing around with someone else, then you are understandably outraged. They're cheating. They're breaking the rules of relationship. We're also going to be talking about breaking promises. A promise is a declaration or a vow. Someone says, I will do this, or I will not do this. And breaking that promise is to fail to conform to an act contrary to that promise. Now, we want to point out that as with the matter of lying, not every breaking of a promise is a moral sin. For example, you might have an appointment to meet someone at a restaurant at 10 o'clock in the morning for coffee. On the way there, you're involved in an accident, and they have to take you to the hospital because you're injured. Obviously, you're not going to be able to keep your promise. Your friend isn't going to show up at the hospital and say, how dare you stand me up? The friend is going to understand that you were on the way to keep the promise, but circumstances beyond your control resulted in a necessary change of plan. And so breaking a promise deliberately is what we're talking about. You could follow through and do what you said you would do, but you decide not to do it. And the final thing we're going to be talking about in this chapter is stealing. This is taking something you have no right to, something you do not have permission to take. And the authors note that this is generally done in a surreptitious. It's easy for me to say that. Actually, I don't think I can get my tongue to say it this morning. Let's try it one more time. Surreptitious way. Close. You're not supposed to say it that slow. And this means you're being sneaky about it. When someone steals, they very seldom do it where people can see them, unless they have an accomplice. This is something you do hoping that no one will know that you did it, so that you can get away with it. Stealing. In talking about these subjects, we go back to our non-consequentialist and consequentialist perspectives. And the authors refer us to rule non-consequentialism. And they leave off a word here, divine rule non-consequentialism. That's really what they're talking about here. And they note that a rule non-consequentialist would generally be opposed to any of these four acts at any time. A lot of that would depend on definition. And the authors have a habit of making rule non-consequentialism far less flexible than it actually is. We'll talk about that specifically as we go along. And then there are, of course, the consequentialist and act consequentialist perspectives. That would be the ego-ethicist perspective and the utilitarian perspective. And these perspectives, these moral perspectives, tie into the discussion we're going to have about these four important areas. With respect to the consequentialist point of view, act consequentialists would not necessarily take a stand for or against any of the issues we discuss in this chapter, unless they felt like doing so. The reason for that is consequentialist theories would accept any of these four actions if it resulted in good consequences. For example, an egoethicist might lie, cheat, break promises, or steal if that egoethicist thought that doing so would redound to his advantage, would result in good consequences for him. A utilitarian might be okay with lying under certain circumstances, cheating, stealing, breaking promises, if it resulted in that which would bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So for consequentialists, these things are not necessarily wrong always or in every circumstance. The situation is going to determine whether or not a lie, for example, is appropriate or not. Well, let's look at the arguments against lying. Our authors say lying may obscure the objectives of those lied to. And in response to that, we can only say, duh, right, that's what lying is all about, is changing someone's direction. Someone is mad at you because of something they know that you have done, and you don't want them to be mad at you, so you want to deflect their anger. They're coming at you in a rage, and so you want to keep them from accomplishing their object, and so you lie to them to turn them away from their goal, the goal they had when they came to confront you with something you have done or said. So yeah, that's the primary motive for lying. The authors say it may hide relevant alternatives. You may not have to lie. There may be other things you can do, and the truth, properly stated, may accomplish much more than a lie would accomplish, and you don't have any moral issues involved in the search for other alternatives. The authors also suggest that it can cause distrust in human relationships. Well, that's certainly true. Have you ever caught a friend in a lie? How did it affect your relationship with that person? Maybe one lie is okay, you can get past that. But if you are catching that person in lie after lie after lie, chances are that the relationship is going to be strained to say the end, and perhaps the relationship is going to come to an end. Another problem with lying is the domino effect. One lie leads to another. The reason for that is lies are inconsistent with the truth. And so you tell a lie, and someone finds out a little bit more of the story, and so you have to tell another lie to try to make your false narrative align itself with the facts. And it can never really do that because it's not true. And so one lie leads to another lie, which leads to another lie, and we find ourselves in that web that Shakespeare wrote of when he said, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave, when first we practice to deceive." And so there is that domino effect involved in lying. The author also points out something that I brought out earlier, that lying gives an unfair advantage or power to the liar. That's when a untrue statement becomes morally important. An advantage is sought through an unlawful means. You are saying something untrue to hurt. Not all untrue statements are lies, but when there is that deliberate lie told to hurt or to gain that unfair power or advantage, that's when that untrue statement becomes morally important. And then the author points out that lying has a deleterious effect on society in general. That means it creates a place you don't want to live. If you live in a culture in which everyone lies as a matter of course, that collective is in danger of unraveling very quickly. because community is built on trust. Relationships are built on trust. And when the trust is broken, then people pull apart. A community in which there is an interlocking series or a network of relationships is destroyed when trust is destroyed. So lying can have a very harmful effect on society in general. On the other hand, there are arguments for lying. The author says lying is justified in defense of the innocent, including self-defense. When our children were small, they were involved in a program at their grade school that taught them how to handle things if someone were to attempt to molest them, touch them inappropriately. And it was recognized that these molesters will often threaten the child and make the child promise that they're not going to tell anyone. And the program said it's okay to tell children they can lie in that situation. Now, as a Christian minister, of course, I struggled with that. And it got me to thinking about this whole business of lying. And that's why I have explained that not every false statement is a lie. A lie to protect the innocent, such as the Gestapo shows up and you have a number of Jewish refugees hiding in a hiding place in your home, and they say, are there Jews hiding here? You tell them they are there, they're going to arrest those Jews, take them to Auschwitz, and you're going to go with them. Is that a lie? Well, you're not trying to hurt, just the opposite. And you're not trying to gain an unfair advantage over that Gestapo agent. Same would be true in that situation with a child, with some molester saying, don't tell anyone. It is an untrue statement. But is it the kind of untrue statement that is considered unlawful? Many people mistakenly think that the Bible, for example, the Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not lie. Actually, they don't say that. The command is, thou shalt not bear false witness. It has to do with perjury, the withholding of truth from those who have a right to the truth. The withholding of truth, when doing so, will result in injury to another, or the telling of a lie so that you'll gain an advantage over other. It has to do with perjury. And does a untrue statement intended to save an innocent life, does that qualify as a lie, as an evil thing, as something that should be censored? It's interesting to note also that among the rabbis who have been discussing the law, the Ten Commandment, the Torah, for over 1,000 years, there is considered to be a hierarchy within the Ten Commandments, so that the most serious sin a person can commit is to violate the first commandment. The second most serious sin, it would be to violate the second commandment, and so forth. The tablets of the law come in two parts. There are those sins that are direct sins against God, and in the second tablet of the law, there are those sins that are sins against our fellow man. And the most serious of these would be the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder. Then you have thou shalt not commit adultery. Then you have thou shalt not steal. And then you have thou shalt not bear false witness. The murdering of someone is considered a greater moral transgression than stealing, for example. And you can see this also in the case law given to us in the Torah, because stealing is punished in a lesser fashion than is the taking of an innocent human life. So when faced with a choice between evils, you choose the lesser of two evils. Now, even if you don't buy my expanded definition of a lie, this would be an explanation that a divine rule consequenceless would make. Yes, in this world, sometimes you face a choice between breaking the sixth commandment or the ninth commandment. In such a case, you choose the lesser of two evils. Now, in the Old Testament system, that might require you to make a sin offering, but you have done better than had you violated the far more serious sixth commandment and got someone killed. The authors also argue that lying is justified for reasons of national security, provided this reason is not abused. Again, secrecy in national security issues is important. Winston Churchill is famous for saying that in war, truth is such a precious commodity that it needs to be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies. Is that morally justifiable? Well, I think the author's qualification here, so long as it is not being abused, it would be within what we might call the rules of the game. Let me explain this. You're playing football. You have your favorite football team out there, and the quarterback calls a misdirection play. And the whole design of the play is to get the defense to think you're going one way and you actually go the other. Now, that is deliberate deception, but it is allowed within the rules. And everyone understands that that is the rules by which the game is played. If, on the other hand, it doesn't work, you have a defensive end that stays at home, chop blocking is against the rules. So the tackle that was meant to see that the play works, the misdirection works, stands up that defensive end, and the fullback takes out his knees on a chop block. That is not allowed within the rules of the game. And so you can almost look at national security, war. It's understood that you feint one way and go the other. You don't tell your enemy that we're going to attack you on the right side. We're going to fake like we're going to the left, but we're going to go to the right. It is understood that misdirection and deception are necessary evils within the greater evil of war. And remember, when we talked about war, we talked about the fact that war might sometimes be a moral necessity, but is never good. It's always a bad thing. And once you get into that area of bad things, one of the reasons war is a bad thing is it gives birth to other bad things. Lying is moral when done to protect trade secrets in business. Kind of the same rule. That's how the game is played. Maybe it can be justified on that basis. And the authors add that little white lies should be allowed as a way of getting along with others in our daily lives. We've seen the Geico commercial where Mrs. Lincoln asks Honest Abe if her dress makes her look fat. And Abe, who cannot tell a lie, says, maybe a little, and she goes storming off. Was it necessary for Abe to lie to get out of that situation? Probably not. How morally important is that? Well, it might be really important. We'll talk about that in just a bit. The authors talk about a moderate position. This is why they state honesty as an almost absolute. Honesty is the best policy. But they would allow for the necessity of untrue statements under certain circumstances. Now, as an absolutist, I would argue that, again, not every untrue statement is a lie. And those untrue statements used, for example, to protect innocent life. And you could also make that case with regard to national security. The untrue statement is intended to protect the citizens of a country from a violent aggressor. Uh, that is an untrue statement for sure, but and it can be deliberate, but it is not intended to gain an unfair advantage or to cause injury to another. And so does it rise to the level of actually being the sort of untrue statement worthy of condemnation? And the absolutist position would say that an untrue statement intended to gain an unfair advantage or to injure another is always wrong. When can you justify doing that? Not all untrue statements have that criminal intent, if you will. And the authors recognize that untrue statements have consequences, particularly lies. They have terrible consequences. And even a white lie can blow up in your face. Lying is also, the authors note, not the only alternative. Take the white lie thing. It may be hurtful to tell someone who says, does this skirt make me look fat? It may be hurtful to tell them, yes, it does. But there may be a gentle way of telling the truth so that the point is given without the hurt. And you might say, well, what do you think? To get into a discussion of the matter. Or you might say, I don't think that skirt is really that becoming on you. I like the blue skirt better. Or you might even ask, do you want the truth? And I've been told in classes by any number of the women students that if they were to ask such a thing, they'd want to know the truth. That's why they ask. So you can, as the Christian scriptures say, speak the truth in love as an alternative to a white lie. What about those situations, though, when if the truth is told, people could get killed? Military secrets, national security secrets might fall under this. Protecting those Jewish refugees you have hidden in your home. What about those situations? The authors say if people have to lie, and I would say, whoa. Let's argue about definitions here. If people have to make an untrue statement, a lie, according to my definition at least, has to have that nefarious intent. Minus that, it's just an untrue statement. But anytime an untrue statement is made, there may be consequences, and the authors suggest, from their consequentialist perspective, we should try to make those consequences as harmful as possible. We should avoid habitual lying. Of course, that happens. Lying can become a habit like any other vice. I want to gain the advantage in every situation I am. Winning is the only thing that matters. And so I lie again and again and again. And before long, somewhere along the line, I guess, I cross a line and I become a liar. Perhaps that doesn't happen with one lie, two lies, but somewhere along the line it happens. And no one can trust you. And they do well not to trust you because you have bad character. And then the authors would say we should be aware that lying can also have a bad effect on the liar as well as the person lied to. And that's what I was referring to by bad character. Habitual lying is a character flaw. And at some point you cross that line, become a liar, and in doing so, you have bad character. The authors also suggest that we should never lie about important matters that may affect the recipient of the lie adversely. And to me, this is what a lie is. No, we should never do that. And notice the author is very absolute about this, because this is the absolute. This is the line that should never be crossed. This is what makes an untrue statement a lie and worthy of condemnation. It's important. And what I say is going to hurt the person who deserves to have the truth. it's going to gain an unfair advantage for me over them, or it's going to do direct injury to them. That is what must never be done. And again, I notice the author is quite absolutist about this. Not much flexibility in that word never, and I agree. And the author says lying can be allowed when there is no other recourse and when innocent life is really at stake. Again, is that a lie? Does that untrue statement rise to the level of moral importance? Is it perjury? And again, from the divine rule absolutist perspective, what is forbidden in the law, the Torah, in the ninth commandment, is perjury. And that is when an untrue statement becomes something that must be censored. Something, as the author says, that we should never do. We move on now to cheating. Cheating is related to lying. It's deception and dishonesty. It is a lie, but it is generally a non-verbal lie. Now, going back to our football illustration, the referee throws a flag, and how many times have you seen the player getting in the ref's face saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, and then you see the replay, and yeah, they did it, the referee saw it. So you have both lying going on there, I suppose. You also have, in the act itself, dishonesty, the breaking of the rule, and that's what cheating is. There are these rules. Society has them, both in an official sense. There are laws. There are codes of integrity. For example, at Colby Community College, you can see it in the syllabus if you'd like. We have a strong position against cheating and against plagiarizing, for example, which is a form of cheating. Strong statements there explaining to our students what the rules are. And if they get caught breaking the rules, then there is a consequence. Arguments against cheating is it's unfair, it's unjust to the others. Everyone is competing for the prize. It is unfair to everyone who is competing lawfully for a person to gain an unfair advantage by breaking the rules. In a relationship, we talk about the fact that cheating is a term we often use in relation to a relationship between a couple, for example. There's an unspoken set of rules there. And the one cheated on is hurt unjustly by the other person's lack of integrity. It's unfair. And that is a strong argument against cheating. It's just not fair. Also, it can be pretty important. The authors mentioned falsified qualifications for professions, for example. That could have a serious effect on someone. How would you like to go to a doctor and that doctor cheated his or her way through med school? They're completely unqualified for what they're doing. They cheated all the way through. They cheated as a resident. They've always cheated. And now they're your doctor. That could have a pretty serious effect on you. So that can be important. And I've already mentioned that it can affect your relationship with others. Just as you cross a line and you become a liar, you can cross a line and become known as a cheater. And no one wants to be your friend because you can't be trusted. It's a trust issue. But there are those who argue for cheating, ego-ethicists usually, and sometimes people who are not generally ego-ethicists, such as students, become ego-ethicists when it comes to getting the good grade, Business people do this too. They say it's a dog-eat-dog world. It's a jungle out there. And you have to cheat to survive and get ahead. I had a businessman once told me that. We were talking about morality in business. He says, well, yeah, if I abide by those rules, I'm out of business because I'm the only one doing it. And I'm going to have the unfair advantage in. And then winning is everything, no matter how you do it. So you have that dirty football team. Let's say the old Oakland Raiders. The Oakland Raiders, not so much. But back years ago, uh, the Oakland Raiders were notorious for being bullies, and not only bullies, just they cheated. And the thing that was so maddening about it, they had a Hall of Fame lineup. They didn't have to cheat. They just did it because that was the culture on the team. And so, winning was everything. Uh, the owner of the team, the general partner that managed the whole thing, Al Davis, was famous for this saying, just win, baby. And that meant whatever it takes. I probably insulted all the Raider fans that may be listening to this. I speak the truth in love. How about the one, everyone does it? That's an excuse a lot of times students give. Everyone's cheating. What's the big deal? It's no big deal. Everyone cheats. It's kind of the culture. Yeah, I suppose. If that's the kind of character you want to have, I prefer not to have that character myself. I remember when I was doing grad school, you're taking a test in the honor system, and I temporarily had a block, and I thought, what was that answer? What was that? I quickly looked it up on Wiki, saw the answer. When I found it, didn't even have to open the article. Oh yeah, that's it. And then my conscience was bothering me, and so I contacted the professor, says I cheated on that test, and told him what I had done. And the teacher was blown away, said I've never had this happen. Who would have known? Oh, I would have known. To me, it was a personal character thing. And he says, well, what do you think I should do? And I says, well, I think I should flunk the test, maybe even the course. And he says, you're not going to flunk the course, you're not going to flunk the test. You're going to get that one wrong. Thanks for turning it in. I appreciate your honesty. That's never happened before. I took great pride in the grades I earned in graduate school. And I wouldn't want to look back on any of my classes and said I cheated to get the grades I got. I wanted to do it on my own. Just my own standard. Some would say it's all right to cheat so long as you don't get caught. That's kind of a football thing, right? Or volleyball. I've often asked my volleyball players in class, what's this thing? You all hit your hands like the ball was tipped, and you know full well it wasn't tipped. And they told me we're coached to do that. Everyone does it. The other team does it. That's just part of the way the game of volleyball is played. Perhaps so. Perhaps it's part of that, like football, the rules of the game. Let's talk now about breaking promises. Promises are, in a way, they're informal contracts. They're implied agreements. And we have a lot of them in our society. These implied agreements enable us to live together safely with one another. For example, there's an implied agreement that I'm not going to hurt my neighbor. It's safe to live next to me. There's an implied agreement that we're not going to lie, we're not going to cheat, we're going to obey the laws that have been imposed for the general good. For instance, red light, we're going to stop. Stop signs, we're going to stop, or at least slow enough to roll through it. And we're going to treat each other with respect and dignity. We keep the promises we make. These are kind of the glue. These implied agreements are the glue that holds a culture together, making it possible for people to live together in a community safely. And the author adds the term meaningfully. Breaking promises can cause disharmony within that group. It's a form of dishonesty. It's cheating in a way. In earlier days, a person's promise, their word, was an integral part of their reputation. Most people lived in rural communities, such as Colby. Urbanization was happening, but it was happening at a relatively slow pace. And you didn't want to have a reputation in the community as being a person who could not be trusted to keep his or her word. And so it used to be said, a man's word is his bond. In our society today, that's no longer the case. And the author suggests two reasons for that. The promises we make are very complex, and so we often need a written contract. And we need it because fewer and fewer people actually honor their word these days. Well, let's look at the arguments against breaking promises. We come back to the danger that can do, the harm that can do to a relationship. All these things have to do with personal integrity. And most of us want to have friends and close relationships with people who are worthy of our trust. And a person who is always making promises they don't keep destroys trust. And when trust is destroyed, it's awfully hard to build it back into a relationship. The domino argument comes in here. I break a promise. Someone wants to know why. What do I do? Chances are I tell a lie. And so one crime leads to another, and it can become habit forming. Breaking promises affects people's life choices. This can happen both ways. Obviously, the person who is constantly making the choice not to honor his or her word is a person that is going to have a less fulfilled life, certainly, than that person who can be depended upon to keep his or her word. But it may be that someone will look at you and say, you know, I was going to have this person do X, Y, and Z for me, but I just can't depend on them to do it. And so I'm going to find someone else. I'm going to choose someone other than them because I can't trust them. This has to do with breaking promises, destroys general social trust. It can do it on an individual level. It can do it so that is your reputation in the community. And this is why in the old days it was so important that a man's word be his bond, because you wanted to have people in that small rural community know they could depend on you. And you didn't want the loss of personal integrity that comes with being a promise breaker. An egoethicist, on the other hand, might argue, hey, I should have the freedom to decide which promises I'm going to keep, which I'm going to break, and any rules against breaking promises is a denial, is taking away my personal freedom. A person who thinks that way, I suppose we would call them a jerk. Another person might say, well, breaking promises should be allowed when more important, more issues involved, such as protecting, saving a life. And yeah, we gave an example of that earlier. You know, you're in an auto accident on the way to keeping your promise, and you end up in the hospital, or there's something that absolutely comes up and you have to do it. Most people understand if that is not your habit, that there must be a good reason, or you would not have kept your word. And we make allowances for such emergency situations. And the authors add one more, that we should be okay with someone breaking their promise as long as no one's hurt. I would contend, in answer to this, that someone is always hurt when someone intentionally decides not to keep his or her word. Because even if the person that you promised to do something, even if they're not hurt, you are. I agree with the Greek philosopher Heraclitus that our character is our choice, and day by day what we do is who we will become. Another argument for breaking promises is that, you know, what about that deathbed thing? Grandpa calls me and says, I'm dying, will you do me a favor? You say, sure, Grandpa, what is it? Says, when I die, I want you to hit your brother in your mouth. Well, wait a minute. Grandpa cannot rule from the grave. And perhaps circumstances down the road, even something they want you to do, it just can't be done later for any number of good reasons. We would understand the breaking of a promise under that circumstance. Someone might say, well, we say buyer beware. Everyone should beware that a promise made might be a promise broken. Ooh, if that is really the case, our civilization's in big trouble. Because what that would indicate to us is that trust is being broken throughout the culture. And as trust is broken, that glue that holds us together is breaking apart, becoming brittle. And there's a big question as to whether or not such a culture can last very long. Well, let's talk about stealing. It's a basic assumption in most societies that people are entitled to what they have inherited, invested, created, or earned. And in the author socialist system, I guess what the government has decided they get to keep, since all the goods are owned collectively. Therefore, stealing is considered to be an immoral act. Arguments against it: people do have a right to property. Now, the author would not agree that people have a right to property because the authors believe that all the goods are owned collectively. But generally, it's been thought that you have property rights, and they're often considered more important than life itself. For example, most cultures have the rule that if a thief breaks into your home at night and you kill that thief, that you're not going to be prosecuted. That thief had no right to be on your property at night, had no right to break into your home, and it certainly has no right to take your stuff without your permission. And who knows, he might have killed you. And so, normally property rights have been considered a pretty sacred thing. Stealing obviously breaks down the trust people have in one another. We've talked about that with relation to some of the other things discussed in this chapter. The same would be true of stealing. Invasion of privacy, for sure, especially when you think of someone who burglarizes a home, can have a horrible psychological impact on those whose homes are violated. And the domino argument, it becomes habit forming. I had the chance as a pastor to talk to a man who had been in prison for burglary. He had found a religion in prison. He was attending our church. I went over to visit him. He told me his life story, and I talked to him. Why would you do that? You had a job. Why burglarize? And he says, you know what? He says, it was a rush. He says, there was nothing like it. I was in someone's house. They didn't know I was there. I was able then to take whatever I want, break their stuff, especially if they're not home. There's nothing they can do about it. It was just a power rush, unlike anything I've had before. He told me even to this day, he had to guard himself lest he be drawn back into it because of the power of that rush. Never underestimate the seductive power of the dark side. Stealing also has a destructive effect on the victim, of course, thieves themselves, loss of integrity, and you can spend some time in jail when you get caught. It's only a matter of time because you keep doing it. Somewhere along the line, you're going to slip up. You're going to get caught. Even if it's not a offense that's going to send you to jail, it's something that can just ruin your life. Think of a running back that the Denver Broncos had a number of years ago, and then they traded him to Detroit. And while he was in Detroit, he stole a teammate's, his overnight bag. He made good money. He didn't have to do that. But for some reason, rather than going and buying one like it, he stole it. Well, he became a pariah in the NFL. Broncos had some injury, and they brought him back for 6 games at the end of the season, and that's it. He's out of the league. No one trusts him. He's a lousy teammate. Obviously, he didn't intend that to be the consequence. Didn't intend to get caught. It happens. And as with stealing, these other issues, that we talked about, stealing has a bad effect on society. Who wants to live in a society of thieves? Unless maybe you're a pirate. Yar, that would be all right. But most people don't want to live in a society where you can't be safe and secure in your person and your property. One of the sad things in our time is that it's necessary to lock the doors. Some would argue that we live in a corrupt economic system, so it's okay for the rich to be robbed to give to the poor. That's kind of the way some people think it should be done. The rich need to pay their fair share. Well, what's their fair share? Well, everything they got. I've heard people argue as much as 90% should be taken away from people who earn, $1 million a year. $100,000 is enough for anyone, unless you're living in a state like New York or California. You might be on welfare with $100,000. $100,000. I don't know. But the idea is, the ends justifies the means. The poor need money. The rich have money. We'll just steal it from them. It's the only way we can balance the inequities that exist within the social structures of this unjust society. Okay, who decides when a society is corrupt? Who decides that the rich are corrupt so that they deserve to have their stuff stolen? Maybe we could empower the government to do it for us. Now, there's a thought. It would be wrong for me to steal the rich guy's money, but I could get the government to take most of it. That'd work well. Here's one. Stealing should be allowed in crucial emergency situations, such as to prevent the starvation of children. It is probably possible to create a scenario that you could use to justify just about anything. But I would say that there are alternatives practically everywhere in this society to stealing. There would be no reason for someone to steal to feed their children in this culture. I have been in India, though, and I have seen children that have nothing to eat. I've looked down from a bridge and saw a little girl sitting on a pile of garbage looking for something for her breakfast. And so there are places in this world that do not have a social safety net. I remember visiting Mumbai. The largest ghetto in the world is located there. You can actually smell it as you're landing in Mumbai from 35,000 feet. We had, on our flight, we had the stewardesses going down the aisles spraying air freshener as the plane was decompressing. And what is that awful smell? And we found out the next day when we saw that ghetto. And I remember we asked the guide that was with us, what do these people do? How do they live? And the guide, just as a matter of fact, said, well, these are thieves. And you realize that begging and thievery were the only option. And get this, over half of the people in India live in abject poverty. Now, in the prevailing religious systems, which is Hinduism, you also have Islam, giving to the poor is considered a meritorious act. And so you do see people giving alms. And there are agencies, non-governmental organizations that will give some help, and the government does give some help too. Not much. How do we handle this from an absolutist perspective? Well, you go back to that ongoing conversation about the law that has been held by the rabbis, and it's the 8th commandment, but the 1st commandment would have precedence over that. And so the saving of a life, l'chaim, the greatest of virtues. And so it would be morally justifiable, though it still might, under that old system, back in the days when the Jewish temple was there, you might need to bring a sin offering for that one. But the law actually talks about mercy towards that person who would steal under such a circumstance. So even in an absolute system, there is room for compassion and mercy. How about this one? I told you about the guy that liked burglarizing because of the thrill. Someone wants a life of thrill, adventure, excitement. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde had that for a while. It ended poorly, and it would, it'll probably end poorly for anyone because eventually you're going to get caught. I mean, that's just the way it is. Especially in this day and age, I don't know how people think they can get away with much of anything, frankly. Some would argue that it's okay to steal from institutions because they can afford it. They end up with most of the money anyway. I ran into this when I was working in a factory. I ran a spot welder, and we had toolboxes given to us by the company. Had nice tools in them. Amazing how many of my fellow welders would need to go to the tool crib to get additional tools because either someone would steal tools from their toolbox when they were on break, or sometimes, frankly, I know the spot welders would steal from their own toolbox, take them home, had the tools furnished by the company to their own collection. And eventually they wouldn't need to do that because they'd have duplicates at home for everything they had there at the job. But the idea was, hey, the company has a lot of money. They don't pay us enough anyway. And look, they have a tool crib full of tools. So who's hurt? Well, how about the person who takes the tools? That personal integrity. You want bad character? I suppose that's up to you. I prefer not to have bad character. And then that argument, as long as I'm not caught, you'll get caught. It just kind of happens. How about the stealing of government military secrets from potential or real enemies? That can be morally justified, I suppose, under the doctrine of protecting a life. And again, it would fit under the rules of the game of war. It's kind of like this. We talked about war being a necessary evil. So imagine a line. You cross the line, you're in the realm of evil. In the realm of evil, you sometimes find that you only have a choice of evils. And in that situation, you do the lesser evil. What other choice do you have? Is it right? Well, you're in the realm of wrong. It's hard to say it's right. But like war itself, I suppose you could argue that sometimes it's a necessary evil.